Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our round 3 of Leader to Leader. This is Colin Rittmaster, the Associate Executive Director at MASSP, and we have a whole team of educators with us today. We have over 150 people who will be joining us remotely, as well as our MASSP team. If you haven't already, please do take a moment to add to the chat so that we can get to know who's in the room. Secondly, because of the size of this and the amount of content, just know that during the general session of today's chat, we're going to ask that you put your questions and concerns into the chat function. We may not be able to address all those questions during this time, but we will be gathering those questions, composing responses, and sharing those with everybody, not only in this chat, but through our Leader to Leader, but also during our COVID-19 update that goes out tomorrow with a recording of this. Secondly, we want to let you know that we will be creating a Google Doc for people to add questions and concerns as we move forward, knowing that during this pandemic, things are changing daily. Third, what I would like to remind everyone is that today's session is set up like a interactive lecture where there's going to be some lecture bursts. Then you're going to have an opportunity where you're going to be pushed out into some small groups of 4 to 6 people. And during that time, we want to make sure that you unmute yourself and that you contribute to the conversation. During those times, you're going to be able to share reactions about what you're doing connected to what we share, an opportunity to discuss what you might need to work on next and in the short term and what might need to be worked out over time. From there, then we'll return to a general session, provide some additional updates, and during that time, you can add additional thoughts or reactions or questions from your small breakout. We'll repeat that 4 times during our session today. With that said, I'd like to make sure everybody knows that Wendy Zadeb, our executive director, is with us today, as well as Steve Seward, my co-moderator for today, as well as Bob Kefshian, who will be providing an update on the legislative executive order that came out. Ryan Casey is behind the scenes, taking care of technology and manipulation that way. And Matt Alley's out there too, our director of student leadership. So thanks for taking time. Feel free to connect with us through Twitter as well. Our agenda for today is going to be an executive briefing from Bob, followed by a continuity of learning plans considerations by me. And then Steve's going to take over around communication leadership. I'll come back around reasonable and appropriate learning opportunities. And then Steve and I will close out around prioritization of time, tasks, and well-being. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Bob Kefshian to talk with you about days and hours and all the other things that came out in that executive order, what it means in the short term and what it might need to be worked out as we go forward.
Thank you, Colin. I want to start all of this by saying at this point, we do have a lot more probably questions than we do have answers on much of this. The executive order came out at about 10:30 this morning. We've been reviewing it, and I'm going to give you what we have to this point. But as Colin opened up with, please, any questions you have, any concerns you have, at least for now, post them in the chat for Leader to Leader. We're going to capture those, and to the extent we can, answer them as we get answers. So I'm going to start with a very high-level overview of what's in the executive order, recognizing that there are limits to what I can tell you. The big thing I want to start with first is days and hours. And I'm going to group this days and hours piece into sort of 2 buckets. New days and hours forgiveness, and then what's happening with existing days and hours forgiveness that were already in law going into this whole thing. New days and hours forgiveness, districts are going to get 13 days forgiven. That is 10 days plus the 3 flex days that the superintendent could have otherwise given. State superintendent, in extraordinary circumstances, can give up to 3 additional flexibility days. They just gave those to everyone automatically. That's where they got the number 13. In addition to that, the state is waiving the 75% attendance requirement from the day the emergency was declared, March 11th, onward through the end of the school year. So no 75% attendance requirement for any days, March 11th and beyond. In addition to that, districts are going to be able to waive 5 full days of instruction and equivalent hours for professional development or other activities that they need in order to gear up to prepare distance learning through the remainder of the school year. Now, all of those things are in addition to some of the existing flexibility that's already in law. So any snow days you have left of the original 6 snow days, you can still claim those. You will not be able to get the additional 3 discretionary days, as I said, because they rolled those into the automatic forgiveness. But up to 38 hours of qualifying professional development can still be counted. So any PD that you've done already that's qualifying PD, or any that you're going to do moving forward, would be counted. That gives you up to 24 total days of discretion and flexibility and forgiveness for the rest of this school year, plus any PD time of the 38 hours of PD. For a seat time waiver for the rest of the year, what they're doing is saying that you need to apply to your ISD in a form and manner that we'll find out tomorrow. You're going to need to fill out a COVID-19 seat time waiver application. And in order to get that, you're going to have to submit what they're calling a distance learning plan for the remainder of the school year. So you're going to submit it. ISDs will be able to begin processing those as soon as April 8th. And as soon as they're approved by your ISD, your days and hours requirements for the remainder of the school year are waived. The plan is going to lay out what you're going to do for student learning for the remainder of the school year. If it relies on online instruction, you're going to have to make sure students have that. But this thing is pretty flexible. It's figure out what you can do for your students, do the best you can for your students, get that into a plan, the form you're going to see tomorrow, get that to your ISD. The idea here is to do as much as you can without penalizing districts and students that may not have access to technology. That if you're going to require technology, you need to make sure you're providing devices. But all the decisions on content and curriculum are decisions that you're going to make locally. There's not going to be anything from the state on this. There is a commitment, in addition to instruction, to providing food service during the break, to paying all school employees, including hourly employees, providing mental health services and supports related to disaster relief. Once you get that approved plan, that's what you need in order to ensure that you're going to continue getting state aid past April. So some other provisions that are in there that I want to highlight: assessment. Spring assessments are canceled, as is everything tied to assessment. So A through F, read by grade 3, educator evaluation, partnership district, goal attainment, all gone for this year. It's for 1 year only, but it's all gone. And juniors are going to be able to take the SAT in the fall, and every other student who was slated to take a PSAT will have that opportunity as well in the fall. In addition to assessments and reporting, I want to talk about grades, credit, and high school graduation. All of these decisions are locally driven. And districts are being given a great deal of flexibility in how to handle this. Really, it's entirely up to the local district to decide when and how to award credit, when and how to award grades, whether or not to use pass-fail options. The requirement is that you have a plan or you have a description of what you're going to do in your plan that you submit to your ISD. That has to include graduating seniors. The executive order is pretty explicit on graduating seniors in terms of all the different types of things a district can do. That could be, for example, to award credits needed for graduation based on work already completed to the point of disaster declaration, or to award based on content mastery or project-based learning, or using a portfolio or resume or culminating activity. If you don't feel as though your students, you can count a graduation or award credit based on what students have done to that point. And districts are required, if a student is off track for graduation, that they provide that student with opportunities. So really the emphasis here is get students graduated, figure out ways to get it done, and you have all the flexibility in the world to figure out how to make that happen. Last couple of quick pieces: teacher certification and continuing ed. The state superintendent's going to have a lot of flexibility to give extensions on certs, do renewals, all of these things that are barriers caused by COVID-19. Expect a lot of these provisions to be waived. MIPSers, you will continue to accrue credit during the closure, and all of this is going to be done in concert with collective bargaining laws and agreements, although we're talking about a tight timeline, so don't expect a whole heck of a lot of negotiation. But if you get questions from your union folks, yes, this does need to be bargained. It's a change in the terms and conditions of employment. It's entirely reasonable that folks would want to have a chance to have a say on how this is done. what I want to end with is this quote from Governor Whitmer, because I think this really encapsulates the charge that we're talking about moving forward. Because I've gone through a lot of legalese in the EO, but the legalese doesn't really cover what you guys need to do. And I think this is a good place to start the rest of the discussion, which is, instead of thinking about strict compliance, we need to focus on the 5 C values: compassion, common sense, compassion, creativity, and collaboration. And that's what I would charge you guys with moving forward. Is you're being given a lot of latitude in how this is going to work. Again, we still have more questions than answers. I think the job at this point is to really think about, what can educators do? What can schools do? What makes the most sense for you, your community, and your students? And not worry so much about whether or not you're checking all the boxes.
So with that, we're going to start to talk about continuity of learning plans, knowing that there's going to be unique needs within local districts, and within local districts, there are unique needs around each of those families that are there. So one of the things I want to emphasize is that your plan doesn't need to be singular in nature. It doesn't mean you have to be only packets. It doesn't mean that you only have to be online or a hybrid. You could offer packets to some students. You could offer a blended approach to some students. You could offer completely online to some students. Your plan needs to take into account the needs of each of your students based on the foundation of what it is that kids need, which is basic needs about, they need to know they belong. They need to know that as a school, we're here to support you and be a part of you. We are not going to use this to penalize you or further widen the gap between you and your peers. And that as we move forward, school is going to be different. How we learn and approach learning is going to be different. And we're not going to try to adjust and replicate what would have happened in a face-to-face school. So the first things that we want to remind you to do is, starting with your students, parents, and educators, is get focused on the beliefs and mindsets that's needed in order for any type of learning to take place as we move forward. As we start to think about those foundational beliefs and our mindsets and our identities as learners, it's important that that's grounded in the relationships that we have and the support that we provide. Most critical during this time is lines of communication and knowing that we're here together. With this said, more communication doesn't mean better communications. One of the things we're hearing in survey and reports back is that some students and families are feeling overwhelmed with communications, as I know many of you are, with all the information there as we're responding to this crisis. So one of the things to be thinking about is, as principals, how do we filter what goes out and how we approach things so that we don't actually miscommunicate or shut off communications while trying to support our students. As we provide these two foundational pieces on top of our beliefs, then it's time to start thinking about how might we supplement learning and support learning with our students and families, recognizing that all of them have unique circumstances, opportunities, and challenge. And as that takes place and that starts to work, how might we then start to look at any new or core learning going forward? This comes from the Ottawa Area ISD and a plan that they've been putting together for their local districts that's being shared out through MASSP as a way to get towards this new piece. What we need to understand is that there is no single answer or simple solution. It may be, as some people have asked in the question, that some of you are going to start out with something as simple as the weekly learning logs from me to you that MASSP has been publishing each of the last 3 weeks. That might be all that you're able to do during this school closure. Is, as a principal, you may send that out to your students and have packets of printouts of that, and then have your teachers connecting back to their students. That may be the minimum piece of what you might do. We're in the works of working on a partnership with a local company that has career and employability training things that will work over 2G and DSL, and has worked with schools to get phones, government subsidized phones, into the hands of students and family for daily interaction. To those of you who are using Google Classroom, Schoology, and other tools in order to get into either existing or refreshing learning or new core. With all of that said, what's important to remember too is that this is about a district plan, not just your building plan. And as building principals, we have to resist the urge to just jump into crisis response mode of problem solving before we have all the correct information. One of the things I was reminded about recently is this African proverb that sometimes if you want to go fast, you're going to be all alone. And this is not the time to be alone other than in social distancing. It's critical that we go together slowly, thinking about the ramifications and the reactions to each of our decisions, working with our central office on this plan. The CASE and CEC, the National Organizations for Council for Exceptional Children, and the administrators of those children put out a continuity of learning plan that we actually reviewed last round of the Leader to Leader. So some of you are currently completely closed, while others have homework packets or some type of continuous learning or e-learning. We know being completely open is not an option anymore this school year. So recognizing where you are now and thinking about what's working, what are challenges and what are opportunities, we need to think through what we might be able to ramp up moving forward. Prioritizing the physical, mental, and emotional health of our students, educators, families, and communities. Secondly, before we get too far into advancing our work, it's important to do a readiness assessment. That readiness assessment that should come from our central offices should focus on not only what capabilities are available in home, but even some of what a home environment looks like. I think about in my home, when we're at our family together, how many bathrooms are in your home and how often can people get into them? If I'm a home with a single bathroom and a single shower, and there's 6 people living in this home, there's only so many, it's going to have to take staging to get everybody through the use of that space. For many of our families that do have internet or computer access to things or a phone, it may be like that single bathroom. And we're going to have to stage when people are able to go online or even access this. For many of our students, their parents are working remotely and they're trying to continue with their work as well. So we need to balance that. So these readiness assessments should be going home likely in snail mail, as well as through your messenger and online surveys that may be on your website. And those surveys should be able to give you an idea that people who are having issues with connectivity could contact you so that you can help support them in getting what they need. So looking at digital, paper, or a blended approach is all acceptable under this plan. Once you have those results, you can think about who needs what moving forward. And then before you start implementing a plan, actually convene your teacher and tech leaders to come up with the actual plan that your district has the capacity to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to break out into small groups. In this small groups, what we're going to ask you to do is take a look at the opening slide that I'm going to put on the next page. And when you're on that opening slide, if you haven't downloaded this file yet, just take a quick picture of the next slide so you have it as a reference. Secondly, what we'd like you to do is change your view to gallery in the upper right-hand corner so that you can see the other 4 to 6 administrator colleagues that are in your group, and unmute at that point, not right now, but unmute when you're in that section so that you're able to talk to each other. In a few minutes, we'll transition, or excuse me, in a minute, you'll be transitioning, and you're going to have a conversation around this. What are you currently doing connected to continuity of learning? Where are you at on this continuum? Based on the information Bob shared and what I just added now, What do you think you might need to do this next week, like touching base with your superintendent or your food services? And then what might you need to further explore in the coming week or two to ramp up your system? So if you didn't download the PDF from the Know Before You Go, please take a look at this because we are going to transition into a small group. We'll be then reconvening in about 5-10 minutes. So please do get to the point of talking about where you are, and then we will transition back, and then Steve will pick up around communication and leadership during this pandemic. As people are transitioning back, please do remute. And then in the chat function, if there was any takeaways from your conversation that are worth sharing that we can capture, and or questions that you want to make sure are addressed, go ahead and add that back into the chat function so that we can add that. We are going to create that Google Doc to get going. So we'll now be transitioning that back into communication and leadership. So Steve Seward is joining us at this time to be able to talk about our role in leading this effort, recognizing that it really is a district effort that we're just a part of.
Hey, Colin, it's Wendy. Steve is giving me a few minutes of his time. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to share with you, I've been working with a committee that MDE convened that is working on what will kind of be the continuity of learning plan from the state. Some of you hopefully have looked at the documents that MASSP has sent out with what those learning plans looked like from Illinois and from Kansas. So if you've looked at those documents, you kind of have a sense of what will be coming out from MDE, obviously with a little bit more of a Michigan specific bend. So that is the document that will give you a little more, and I really would use the word guidance because Michigan is a local control state. So many of the things that need to be determined are going to be district determined. It's really going to be the district that talks about, all right, what are we going to require of our seniors, for example? Are we going to do pass-fail? Are we going to give grades? So even things like that are really going to end up being, you know, determined by your district, but MDE is going to put out guidance of things you should be considering when you're making those decisions. So know that those things are coming. The other thing that I just want to draw everyone's attention to, we sent out an email yesterday, MASSP, that gave you a roadmap of considerations that you should be looking at as we make this transition away from in-person instruction to some type of virtual option. And obviously realizing for everyone that isn't going to be online, as Colin referenced earlier. And I also want to remind everyone that in that same email, we gave you a solution that is called From Me to You. And MASSP is going to put that out every week. We have been for the last 3 weeks, so we'll keep going forward with that document. But that is a great solution for 7-12 for those of you that know connectivity is going to be a problem in your district. So if you did not look at those two things that we emailed to you yesterday, I would advise you to go back and look at your email and find those from yesterday. I think they'll be really helpful to you.
And
So watch for MDE's plan to be coming out. There's going to be two things. There's actually going to be a form that the district has to complete with your learning plan, and those are going to be sent into the ISD and approved. And then there's also going to be a guidance document from MDE, and that should come out sometime next week, I believe. So those are going to be kind of critical things. And MASSP is going to continue to have these leader-to-leader forums on Thursdays. So in future ones, I believe that we'll probably be talking about what does your plan look like? You know, what do you need help with? What do you need clarification on? So we'll be coming back with that as well.
Thanks, Wendy. So let's jump into communication and leadership, knowing that that's the essence of everything that we're doing. Some are technical pieces, some are adaptive. These are all adaptive pieces of managing complex change. So you probably have seen this graphic, but if you look across, you see vision, skills, incentives, resources, and action plan. When those things are clear to stakeholders, change and complex change take place. However, if one of those is missing, the vision, What we look over to the right is confusion. Think about your staff as you go through these and think about how are they feeling? What are you noticing? Individuals, groups, or your entirety of your team, or even yourself? And if you're feeling in these ways, it might be looking back at this chart and saying, what's missing? The other one is if you look at the third row down, the vision, if the skills are missing, people have anxiety. We're asking teachers right now and leaders to move into an online format, which is confusing to many. Some people struggled with opening an email, and now we're asking them to go online and try and do this, or plan a week ahead where some people were planning day by day. So think about if anxiety is shown, it might be a lack of skills. So how do we as leaders infiltrate that and support them with where they are? If we go into the next piece that's missing, it's incentives. If you think about incentives, if those are missing, it's gradual change. Incentives are going to be different for each person. So for me, knowing that students are successful or the team is successful has me motivated and is my incentive. Some people work for money. Some people work for praise. Some people just work because it feels good to work. But know what works for your team or what motivates them, and then think about what that gradual change will happen if you're not clear on what the incentives will be for each one of your teammates or individuals within your system. The other one is resources. We know there's a ton of resources coming at us right now. Sometimes it's an overwhelming sense of the resources that are coming at us. Sometimes it's a lack of resources. But you notice if resources are missing or there's too many, frustration begins. People begin to feel overwhelmed with their realities. The last one is if there isn't a clear action plan, what begins to happen is we have multiple false starts, which goes back to what Colin mentioned earlier, is go slow. Think intentionally about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and ensure that everybody has clarity over your purpose. As you look at this chart, just examine it for a moment and think to yourself, how are people feeling? What are you noticing? And how do you adapt to support them through these complex changes? Because they're not going away, my hunch is. They're going to be with us for a while. So carry it with you. You can screenshot it with you, or we can send it to you through MASSP. But just examine this chart. The next slides are all from Covey's work. So there's 4 ways that we can build dividends. And this is the time in which we need to build dividends because it's complex change. How are you inspiring trust? Are your words and your actions aligned? The moment we put something out and then pull it back out, some people consider that an absolute and get frustrated. Always know your purpose and clarify it, just like we expect teachers to do in the classroom. Know where you're going and how you're going to get there. The other thing is align your system. How are you using your parapros? How are you using your special ed folks? How are you using your counselors? How are you using your custodians? Anybody that's a paid employee, how do you use all of these people to align your system and get it to move forward? And then the last piece you see there is truly just unleashing talent. Know the skills, the wills, the capabilities of your team, where it might even lack, and then how do you work with one another to get your system moving forward? The next graphic over to the right are the cores of credibility. And if you look at those, they're what we all try to embrace as leaders, but are awfully tough in these times of complex change and uncertainty. The first one is just integrity. Are you congruent? Your words, your actions, and your reactions. I know, for instance, when I get stressed, it shows instantly. I react. I get frustrated. My nonverbals show it, everything. I need time and space to think, perhaps go for a run, organize my thoughts, and then I can think. I just need to give space. The other one is know your intent. We often come into things with an agenda. If it is just a must-do, let people know it's a must-do, tell them the what, and then they have say over the how. But too often we're unclear on, are we telling people what to do, or if we're afraid to tell them what to do because it's just tough in these circumstances of saying, let's move forward at this. Your control over is how are you going to put this into place? So it goes back to aligning that system. The other one is capabilities. Are you relevant? Is what you're saying relevant? Do your teachers have the capabilities, or your staff have the capabilities to ask or do what you're asking them to do? And the last one is, what's your track record? What results do you have to stand back upon to say, now we're moving forward as a team? So as you take those big pieces, the complex change graphic, and you think about Covey's work, think about these key ideas. Know your influencers. Who are those covert and overt powers? I know, for instance, there were some of the covert people were people that I had not thought of. Like perhaps an individual that really was not my favorite person, but they were somebody that I knew I had to access because they had links to almost everybody in the system. It wasn't the person who was the most outspoken, by the way, either. Think from various perspectives. who's going to be impacted by whatever decisions that you push out? Because it's like an onion that once you peel open one piece, as we know, another layer lives beneath it. The other one is know your intentions and stay true to your vision. These times of change, we're going to want to change based on all the different influences that are in front of us. Always know where you're going and how you're going to get there. And then finally, the other one is be flexible and differentiate. People are going to need different things. So how do you support them in this time in the same exact way we ask teachers to differentiate for students? The other one is all around communication of how do you keep things clear and bullet pointed? Most people, if they're reading a narrative form right now, it is complex. So how do you keep things simple and clear? A lot of what I've been reading in the past was keep things about an index card in length or summarize it for people so that they can read it. The other thing that we had talked about on our team is know your stakeholders. If you're dealing with parents or writing letters to parents, you might have to tone down the language. For instance, the district that I worked in, one of the things we had to be conscious of is we wrote things at a 4th or a 5th grade level. That was because that's where our clientele was. So keep those things in mind as you work forward as well. The other one is be open to abstract thinking. Before pushing documents out, how are you getting stakeholder voice to challenge your thinking and think flexibly around things? And the last piece is know your culture. What's the skill? What's the will? What are the triggers? What are the perceptions? What social pieces need to be put in play? All of those different pieces that come into play with key ideas. That being said, if you go to the next slide, you're going to get a chance to chat about this. Or there's one more thing, is there's these different tools. Sorry about that. There's these different tools. One of them is the Innovator's Compass. I don't know if you've used this or not, but if you ever want to walk through it, give somebody on the MASSP team a call and we'll talk you through it. It's an innovative compass, which you're thinking about ideas, boundaries, barriers that are in place, and then you strategize with the team. The other one over to the right side is the here's what, here's why, and now what, which is Bruce Wellman's work. So it might be we need to put in a communication to parents. Why? Because they're essential to our work. Now what? That's an action piece, and that's saying Steve's going to take this by Friday, come up with a plan, distribute it to the team for pushback, and then we're going to send it out by Monday morning. So it's a here's what, here's why, and now what. It's just an organizing tool for project management. So there's 2 resources for you. We're going to send you out into your chat rooms again, and this is probably going to only be about 5 minutes, so share the air with those around you. But you can see, what are you connecting with? What might need to be addressed? What are you going to further explore? When you're ready, we'll go into those new chat rooms, unmic yourself or unmute yourself, and be ready to dialogue and share the air.
So before we transition to what it means to be reasonable appropriate, Bob Kefjian is going to provide one more update specific to evaluations.
Procedures under Section 1249 and under Section 104 are temporarily suspended so as to waive any requirement for assessments or other performance evaluations of teachers and district administrators during the 2019-20 school year. So it's as broad and pretty clear as it really can be right there in the executive order. Performance evaluations for the remainder of the school year are waived, just straight up gone. As far as what would you do if you needed to do a layoff, you're going to want to, if you're facing layoffs, you're going to want to talk to your local district attorney about how to handle that, because you're going to have some unique circumstances. But the EO doesn't speak to things like notification deadlines for non-renewal or layoff. So, it's silent on those things. So those laws would remain in effect unless they're changed by a subsequent EO, which I don't suspect is going to happen. So imagine though that you've got some teachers that aren't getting an evaluation this year, right? They're highly effective and were highly effective for 3 years. What would have happened if you'd have done a layoff and those people wouldn't have been evaluated? It's a roughly equivalent situation.
So Bob, people are commenting to me that the evaluation piece is not in the EO.
I can, it's section 4, I think it's page 11, 10 or 11 of the EO.
I'm wondering if they're looking at maybe a shortened version, or just like, kind of like maybe they're not looking at the full piece. But just as a follow-up, maybe even in the COVID-19 our update that we'll send out today, maybe we can draw attention to that piece.
Yep. If anybody's looking at the actual EO, it's on page 11, section 4, Roman numeral 4, subsection H. And I'm sure that's up on the governor's website, the COVID website. I know it's up on our website, and it was linked from the blast earlier. So just know that that's out there.
And one more thing I wanted to bring up to people too. The EO specifies that it allows, I think it basically identifies school employees as being essential personnel or essential workers. And that the intent with that was knowing that teachers might need to go back to the building, because maybe, now that they're going to be providing instruction, they might be like, man, I wish I had my mini whiteboard, or I wish I had this out of my classroom or that out of my classroom. So it gives them the opportunity to go back to their room and get things. It even could possibly, like, some teachers have connectivity issues at their own home. So they might need to go back in their classroom to actually be able to connect with students. The other thing that it might allow is, maybe a teacher wants to have, their husband or their child come in and videotape them teaching a lesson using science equipment, for example. So that's what the intent is. It's to allow people to come back to the building to be able to do those types of things. It's not intended that, we're going to require all teachers to start reporting, or we're going to require people to come to meetings. I mean, we still need to be following the social distancing, guidelines and things of that nature. So just if anybody misinterprets that language, I just wanted that to be clarified. Is there anything you'd add to that, Bob?
No.
Great. Okay, on with the program.
All right, so we're going to combine the last two sections in honor of your time. So we'll be going through these last two sections, and then we'll have one breakout to our small groups again. We will not reconvene from our this last set of breakouts. That will be the end. But I do want to remind everybody that any questions you have, please do continue to put those in chat. And then also that we will send a copy of this presentation to all participants by tomorrow morning, as well as include a recording of it with reference during tomorrow afternoon's COVID-19. So as we go forward, I think these words from Perry Zirkle, who's a specialist in special education, are important. At the end of the day, this is about what is essential and what is practicable. The idea that we're going to continue to push forward with new content as if school is in session would be inappropriate at this time, unless that's something like you've been facilitating, like Michigan virtual classes have, where things have been up and running. So as we go forward, be thinking about what's reasonable and individually appropriate given the circumstances. That could be individually appropriate for teachers because of their skills, and individually appropriate for students and families. Secondly, we have to remember as educators, just like doctors have their oath, as educators, we have to make sure that we do no harm. So as we go forward and you think about these, and we had a session last week with Luskin Albertson around compassion over compliance. And at the end of the day, what we know is that parents who are partners don't take us to court. So as we go forward, be thinking about how do we continue to communicate with our parents and collaborate with our parents. And then ensure that our teachers are documenting what they have as far as conversations, the date, the purpose of the conversation, and what that outcome is. That usually is what is happening that makes the biggest difference. And Steve mentioned earlier around utilizing our staff. If you haven't already done so, I'd be looking at our administrators, our counselors, our ancillary staff like speech and language and social workers, and our special ed staff to contact those students who are on IEPs or have 504 plans or are English learners. Assess where they are, what their needs are, what's working, what would they need or appreciate from you as we go forward. Secondly, as you guys start to develop your plan, look for consistency. Wendy mentioned that she's on a group that's putting together guidance. So you don't need to define all of this right now, but we want you to be thinking about this. Isn't about providing 5 or 6 hours instruction for each course each day. It might be a single department or a single grade level coming up with 60 to 90 minutes worth of content for our high school kids, maybe 15 to 90 minutes for our middle school students. Trying to do everything is only going to further exacerbate the problem and the concerns. It may be as simple as greeting our kids, providing them a little quick mini lesson, showing them how to do something and giving them opportunity to do it. 1 or 2 things a day is continuity of learning. Going back to what Steve said too, be clear about who's going to do what and why, and then how are they going to do it. When you think about change, if there's uncertainty in the plan, that's usually when problems come up. So be thinking about those pieces and think flexibly, knowing that there is no single solution. In addition to that, be thinking about what's the role of the teacher and what's the role of the student. Beyond that, remember what is a district responsibility versus your responsibility at the school level, and be clear about what teachers and student responsibility, as well as our families and our caregivers. I believe in the very near future that guidance is going to be coming out that Wendy talked about, which will help to provide some of that as you're putting together these plans. I often use visuals to help communicate a message. And one of the ones that came to mind as Steve and I were talking is this idea of seeing the forest or the trees amongst the forest. Be careful that we're not taking a 30,000-foot view when putting together a plan that might be a foot from the students that we work with. Focusing in on a small few things, or even one thing, like that weekly learning plan or something else, could provide the focus and the attention that our students and families need, not only academically, but social, emotionally, and mentally taking care of that. That the more we put into our picture, the more overwhelmed we can be. So narrowing our focus is essential. In addition to that, we need to make sure as leaders that we take a break. As Steve shared earlier, sometimes he needs to go out for a run. For me, I need to go play with my dogs and do a little training and just get outside and away from people to allow my brain to slow down. But coming up with a daily to-do list about what's even feasible during a day is so critically important. Prioritizing what you need to do, knowing that each and every day the tasks change and your phone is going to go off the hook. Steve was sharing earlier, just because of how we're operating and everything else, sometimes we just need to actually park our phone for a moment so we can actually get something done. Remember that when we can check things off our list, it's very self-gratifying and can be a stress reliever. Third, you don't have to have all the answers. As principals, we often feel like we have to be the problem solvers and resolvers. But just as critical as giving time for things to work out. We don't need to just put out a plan today so we can react and feel like we did something. It's better to take our time and work through what we need to do to be able to make their needs. Fourth, set some framework to the hours you're working. As principals, we're not used to working from a certain set of time. We do the job and we do it until the job is done. But we need to for not only our own sanity, but for our teachers that we work with and our families that we live with, not to be overbearing in what we do. As you're thinking about things and you're sending out texts and emails and setting up meetings, just know that everything you're doing is also having a ripple effect on others. Sometimes we need to filter what's coming through, park some things, and set time aside to revisit them. Not everything is a 911 that needs to be resolved today. Know too, you're not alone. MASSP is here. Your colleagues are here to work with you. We need to be compassionate, understanding, and thoughtful in how we go. So as we take care of not only others, how do we take care of ourselves and those that we love? Your attitude is what makes the greatest difference. Tim Elmore in his work around habitudes had a story about the thermometer and the thermostat. As principals, many of us are feeling more like a thermometer, responding to things each and every day, and all we're doing is communicating the temperature outside. We need to slow down, provide some focus, and whether we're more low tech, like the thermostat on the right, or more connected and higher tech, like the Nest on the top right. What we do sets the temperature not only for our families, but for our teachers and for our students and their families. We need to set a temperature that allows people to not feel like they're burning up or boiling, but that this too we can do. So as we go into this next round of breakouts, please take some time to think about what are you doing to be the thermostat within your district to set priorities and manage these things as we go forward. So at this time, we'll be going into our last breakout, knowing that we won't be returning from that to the whole group.